On what should have been her wedding day, Sarah sat in seat 14 of a red-eye flight to New York, wearing jeans and an old NYU film school sweatshirt she'd rescued from the donation pile. Her phone, her old one, restored to life, showed 47 missed calls and hundreds of messages she wouldn't read. Hollywood was imploding with speculation, but for the first time in months, she wasn't part of the performance. The only message that mattered was the one she'd left in Morrison's private screening room, uploaded directly to his personal server. A short film she'd edited over 3 sleepless nights. She'd titled it Director's Cut, The Making of a Marriage. It opened with security camera footage from their first meeting, the coffee spill that started everything. But this time, the angle revealed Morrison's subtle nod to his assistant just before Sarah entered, the carefully placed cable that caused her trip. Scene by scene, she'd constructed a behind-the-scenes documentary of their relationship using his own surveillance system against him. Their late-night editing sessions, but with hot mic recordings of him discussing the long game with his producers. The proposal, but from cameras that caught the rehearsals, the multiple takes, the careful positioning of every extra. The gradual replacement of her wardrobe, intercut with focus group feedback on her marketability. The final sequence was just her, speaking directly to the camera in his bedroom at 3 a.m. "You taught me that every great story needs an authentic ending," she'd said. "This is mine." Now, somewhere below her, a USB drive hidden in that same coffee-stained camera lens contained something else. Her original screenplay, rewritten over 6 months of secret early mornings. No longer a thinly veiled criticism of Morrison, but a deeper exploration of power, art, and the courage to walk away from golden cages. Her phone buzzed, one of the few numbers she'd kept. "Turn on TMZ?" Rosa texted. "He's trying to spin it." Sarah clicked the link. Morrison sat in their favorite restaurant, looking artfully devastated in a carefully rumpled suit. "I'm heartbroken," he told the reporter. "Sometimes the pressure of Hollywood can be too much for someone not used to this world. I only hope Sarah finds the peace she's looking for." She smiled, knowing what was coming. At exactly 9 a.m., every major entertainment site would receive an anonymous email containing clips from her documentary. Not enough to destroy Morrison. She wasn't interested in revenge, but enough to ensure he couldn't rewrite this ending. 6 months later, Sarah stood behind a small monitor on the set of her directorial debut. The budget was tight, the schedule tighter, but every person on her crew was there because they believed in the story. Her producer, a former Morrison wife who'd reached out after the wedding that wasn't, had helped secure independent funding. "Ready for the next shot?" her assistant asked, offering a coffee that wasn't perfectly temperatured. Sarah looked through the viewfinder at her lead actress, a talented unknown who'd been passed over for bigger roles because she didn't fit the image. In the scene, she was about to walk away from a life of privilege to pursue her own dreams. "One change," Sarah said. "Let's lose the perfect lighting. Make it real." Her phone buzzed. Morrison's latest film, her voice, her choice, was struggling at the box office despite its star-studded cast. Critics called it inauthentic and out of touch. His next project had been quietly removed from the studio's schedule. Sarah silenced her phone and turned to her crew. "All right, everyone. This isn't about getting the perfect shot. This is about telling the truth. Ready?" The camera operator nodded, Rosa's daughter, who'd inherited her mother's eye for authentic moments. And action. As she watched her vision come to life, Sarah touched the coffee-stained camera lens that now hung from a simple chain around her neck. Some people might see it as a reminder of where she came from, but she knew better. It was a compass, pointing toward who she'd always been, before the perfect lighting, before the staged scenes, before she'd forgotten that the most powerful stories are the ones that dare to be real. The first thing to go was her wardrobe. Sarah came home one day to find her apartment transformed into a makeshift boutique, her comfortable directing pants and practical shirts replaced by designer pieces that better suited her new position. Nina, her new personal stylist, hired by Morrison without consultation, explained that every public appearance needed to tell the right story. James thinks this channel piece would be perfect for the variety interview, Nina said, holding up a cream-colored suit that cost more than Sarah's old monthly rent. It suggests both sophistication and accessibility. Sarah ran her fingers over the fabric, remembering how Morrison had praised her eye for authentic detail. What's wrong with my usual clothes? Nothing, darling. We're just elevating your narrative. The new phone arrived next, delivered by Morrison's assistant with a cheerful upgrade for better coverage. It came pre-installed with a suite of apps that tracked everything from her location to her calendar. Any appointments needed to be approved through Morrison's team first, for scheduling efficiency, they said. Her old phone, with its carefully guarded notes app full of film ideas and observations, disappeared during the move to Morrison's Malibu estate. When she mentioned it, Morrison's security chief smiled apologetically. Probably got mixed up in the shuffle. But don't worry, we've transferred all your important contacts. The definition of important became increasingly narrow. Her former film school friends' messages went unanswered. They weren't aligned with the image. Her weekly coffee dates with Rosa, the cleaning lady who'd become a confidant, were quietly removed from her calendar. You need to focus on the wedding planning, Morrison's publicity team explained. The whole industry is watching. They weren't wrong. Every detail of their engagement made headlines. Hollywood's power couple redefines romance, screamed one magazine cover, featuring a photo of them at a charity gala. Sarah barely recognized herself in the image, perfectly styled, perfectly poised, perfectly silent, while Morrison discussed their relationship with the reporter. The tipping point came during a rare moment alone in Morrison's home office. Sarah was searching for a misplaced script when she found a folder labeled Fellowship Submissions. Inside was her screenplay, the one Morrison had promised to submit to the prestigious New Voices in Film program. The submission deadline had passed 2 weeks ago. I meant to tell you, Morrison said from the doorway, making her jump. I reviewed it again, and it's not quite ready. The female protagonist is too angry. It doesn't fit with your public image right now. Before Sarah could respond, he pulled out a small box. Inside gleamed a diamond bracelet that probably cost more than the fellowship grant. I thought you could wear this to the press conference tomorrow, he said. We're announcing my new project, a feminist reimagining of a classic film. I want you by my side when I talk about empowering women in the industry. The irony felt like a slap. Sarah looked down at the bracelet, its diamonds catching the light like tiny cameras, always watching, always recording. Of course, she heard herself say, the words tasting like ash. Whatever you think is best. Later that night, Sarah stood on their ocean view balcony, the salt air the only thing that felt real anymore. Her reflection in the glass doors showed a stranger, perfectly curated from her expensive highlights to her designer pajamas. She touched the screen of her new phone, its tracking apps glowing like digital chains. Inside, she could hear Morrison on a call about wedding venues. The symbolism needs to be perfect, he was saying. We're not just planning a ceremony. We're staging the ultimate Hollywood ending. Sarah looked out at the Pacific, vast and free. Somewhere in a storage unit across town, in a box marked Old Clothes, her original screenplay sat hidden in the pocket of her favorite directing pants. The only copy Morrison didn't know about. Its protagonist's final line echoed in her mind. Sometimes the most powerful cut is the one that sets you free. Sarah knew something was off the moment she stepped onto Soundstage 12. The security guard winked at her. Carl never winked. Her keycard access had been mysteriously upgraded to override even Morrison's private office restrictions. And her morning production meeting had been moved from the usual cramped conference room to the main stage where they'd filmed the heart of Midnight Echoes. She pushed open the heavy soundstage door and stopped dead. The cavernous space had been transformed into an exact replica of the diner from Waiting for Dawn, her favorite film, the one she'd mentioned to Morrison months ago during a 2 a.m. editing session. Every detail was perfect, from the peeling vinyl booths to the slightly flickering neon sign. Your coffee's getting cold. Morrison sat in the corner booth, their booth, she realized, the one where they'd spent countless nights restructuring scenes and rebuilding character arcs. He wore the same kind of plain white t-shirt and jeans he'd worn when they first started working together, before she knew him as anything more than the industry's most brilliant terror. "What is all this?" Sarah asked, sliding into the booth. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the coffee cup. "Oat milk latte, perfectly temperatured." "I've been thinking about truth," Morrison said, his fingers drumming an irregular rhythm on the formica table. "About what you said that first day, about organic moments being more powerful than manufactured ones." Behind him, Sarah noticed movement in the shadows. A camera crew, trying very hard to look invisible. Her stomach tightened. "The thing is," Morrison continued, "sometimes the most authentic moments need a little staging, a little direction." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Sometimes you need the perfect set to tell the perfect story." The box opened to reveal a ring that probably cost more than her entire film school education. The diamonds caught the carefully arranged lighting, throwing prisms across the table like tiny spotlight beams. "Sarah Chen," Morrison said, his voice carrying that same intensity he used when describing his creative visions. "Will you marry me?" Time seemed to stretch like overexposed film. Sarah was acutely aware of the cameras rolling, of the crew holding their breath, of the perfect composition Morrison had created for this moment. It was exactly the kind of scene she dreamed of as a film-obsessed teenager. So why did it feel like a carefully constructed cage? "Yes," she heard herself say, and the words seemed to echo across the soundstage. Morrison's smile was triumphant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit, of course. He'd probably had it sized using one of her other rings, just like he measured every detail of his shots. The crew erupted in applause. Champagne appeared from nowhere. Sarah found herself swept into a whirlwind of congratulations and camera flashes. Entertainment Tonight had somehow materialized on set, along with her parents, flown in from San Francisco, already dressed for interviews. During a brief moment alone in her office-turned-green room, Sarah overheard Morrison on the phone through the thin wall. "We need to push the announcement," he was saying. "No, the leading lady reveal needs to wait. This is perfect timing. The industry's getting tired of directors who chase the actresses. The passionate mentor sees true talent angle will play better. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." Sarah stared at her reflection in the small makeup mirror, at the ring that felt heavier by the minute. The lights outside her door flickered like the diner's neon sign, and for a moment, she could have sworn they spelled out "exit." Instead, she straightened her shoulders and plastered on a smile. The cameras were rolling after all, and she knew her role in this scene. She just hadn't realized it might become a permanent part. 3 weeks before the wedding, at exactly 2:17 am, Sarah sat cross-legged on the pristine white carpet of Morrison's Malibu mansion, surrounded by the evidence of her systematic erasure. Her old production notebook lay open before her, its pages filled with dreams she'd once dared to write down. Next to it sat the approved wedding seating chart, where her film school friends had been replaced by industry power players she'd never met. The house's silence felt oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of waves and the soft hum of security cameras tracking her every move. Morrison was away, doing final location scouts for Her Voice, Her Choice. The irony of the title no longer lost on her. Sarah pulled out her old phone from its hiding place inside a hollowed-out copy of The Art of Film Direction. The battery was almost dead, but it still held her original notes from that first year working with Morrison. She scrolled through them, watching her own transformation through time-stamped entries. Day 1. Spilled coffee on a $500,000 lens. Somehow kept my job. Maybe there's something real beneath his reputation. Month 3. Late-night editing session. JM actually listened to my ideas. For a moment, it felt like true collaboration. Month 8. He asked about my dreams today. No one in Hollywood ever does that. Maybe I was wrong about power corrupting everything it touches. The entries continued, a documentary of her slow surrender disguised as rise to power. She picked up her engagement ring, watching it catch the moonlight. Even now, she had to admire Morrison's attention to detail, the way the diamonds were cut to sparkle most brilliantly under red carpet lighting. Her laptop hummed to life, its screen illuminating the room. With trembling fingers, She opened the file she'd been working on all night. A frame-by-frame analysis of her relationship with Morrison, edited like one of his films. The parallels were stark. The meet-cute. A clumsy PA spills coffee, creates movie magic by accident. The mentor arc. Powerful man recognizes raw talent, takes her under his wing. The romance. Late nights. Creative passion. The blurring of professional and personal. The proposal. A perfect scene, meticulously staged for maximum emotional impact. The transform. The gradual makeover, physical and spiritual, into his ideal. It was textbook Morrison, the same story structure he'd used in his last 3 marriages. She was just another remake, with slightly updated cinematography. Sarah's phone, the new one, buzzed with a message from Morrison's assistant. James wants to discuss your director's shadowing opportunity. He's thinking maybe after the first year of marriage, once things settle. Another buzz. Also, the wedding planner needs your final approval on the string quartet. James suggests the one that played at the Oscar Governor's Ball. A third. Don't forget tomorrow's dress fitting. The Vogue team will be there. Sarah stood up, her shadow on the wall reminding her of the opening shot of her screenplay, the one Morrison had deemed too angry. She walked to the massive window overlooking the Pacific, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The security lights illuminated the manicured garden below, making it look like a film set waiting for action. In the reflection, she caught a glimpse of herself. Designer pajamas, perfectly highlighted hair, the careful posture of someone always camera-ready. Behind her, the wall of Morrison's awards glinted like watchful eyes. She opened her laptop's camera and hit record, a habit from her documentary-making days. The problem with living in a perfect scene, she said to the lens, is that you forget it's not reality. You forget that real life isn't about perfect lighting or carefully scripted moments. It's about... She paused, looking down at her engagement ring. The diamonds seemed different now, less like stars, more like shackles. It's about having the courage to call cut on your own story. Taking a deep breath, she opened a new document and began to type. Dear James, the private dining room at Chateau Mont d'Or buzzed with Hollywood's elite. A carefully curated guest list of producers, studio heads, and critics who could make or break careers with a single tweet. Sarah sat beside Morrison, playing her role perfectly in a silk gown that cost more than her first car. 3 months of etiquette coaching had taught her exactly how to hold her champagne glass, how to laugh at industry jokes, how to be the perfect ornament to Morrison's empire. James, called out Marcus Reynolds, the famously outspoken head of Summit Studios, his voice slightly slurred from expensive wine. You magnificent bastard, you've done it again. Morrison's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Sarah's knee under the table. She'd recognized his tell, the slight tension that meant a scene was about to play out exactly as he planned it. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Morrison replied with practiced modesty. Marcus laughed, loud enough to draw attention from neighboring tables. The whole marrying the nobody angle. Brilliant. The press is eating it up. Director discovers true love behind the camera. You couldn't write better PR if you tried. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah maintained her smile, the way Nina had taught her, lips curved just enough to suggest warmth without creating wrinkles for the cameras. I think you've had enough wine, Marcus, Morrison said smoothly, but he didn't deny it. No, hear me out, Marcus continued, immune to the warning glances from other guests. When you told me about this plan last year, Marcus, Morrison's voice carried that director's edge that usually silenced unruly actors. I thought you were crazy. Who's going to care about some PA-turned-producer? Marcus mimicked himself with drunken precision. But you said it would humanize your image before the women's empowerment film, make you relatable, and damn if you weren't right. Sarah's perfectly temperatured water turned to acid in her throat. Last year. He planned this last year, when she was still bringing him coffee and discovering his hidden script notes. Before the late-night editing sessions. Before she'd started to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone had finally seen her for her talent rather than her utility. Think about it. Marcus was saying to the increasingly uncomfortable room. The timing is perfect. The wailing hits right before pre-production starts on her voice, her choice. James Morrison, champion of women in film, practicing what he preaches. The optics are, excuse me, Sarah heard herself say, standing up. I need some air. She moved through the restaurant on autopilot, muscle memory from countless events guiding her to the private terrace. The city lights below blurred like an out-of-focus shot. Sarah, Morrison's voice behind her, carefully modulated to convey concern. Always performing, always directing, even now. Marcus is drunk. He doesn't know what he's talking about. When did you meet with Cassandra? The question surprised even her. What? Cassandra, your ex-wife. I saw the lunch meeting on your calendar last week, the one your assistant tried to hide. A pause. She'd learned to read his silences during their countless hours in the editing room. This one said he was choosing his next line carefully. It's a potential project, he admitted finally. A small art film she's producing. Nothing concrete. Sarah turned to face him, really seeing him for the first time since the proposal. He looked exactly like he had in that first production meeting. Handsome, confident, completely in control of his narrative. The perfect shot, carefully composed. What's it about? She asked, already knowing the answer. His hesitation told her everything. She pulled out her phone, the new one, with all its tracking apps, and opened her browser. The Hollywood Reporter's headline glared back at her. Cassandra Lee to produce The Director's Wife, an intimate look at Hollywood's power dynamics. The pieces clicked together like a perfect edit. His sudden interest in dating someone behind the scenes. The carefully leaked photos of their late-night work sessions. The staged proposal. Even her screenplay being conveniently lost. She wasn't his happy ending. She was his rewrite. Sarah Chen's hands trembled as she balanced the production department's fourth coffee order of the day. 16 hours into her first shift as James Morrison's production assistant. And she'd already learned that his perfectionism extended far beyond the camera lens. Right down to the precise temperature of his triple-shot oat milk latte. The set of midnight echoes hummed with the controlled chaos typical of a Morrison production. Crew members darted around like caffeinated atoms, their walkie-talkies creating a symphony of overlapping instructions. Sarah had spent the past 3 years preparing for this moment, working her way up from indie film sets to this career-making opportunity. She wasn't about to let something as mundane as coffee delivery derail her dreams of becoming a director herself. That's what she told herself, right until her heel caught on a stray cable. Time seemed to slow as the coffee tray tilted. Sarah watched in horror as Morrison's precisely temperatured latte arsed through the air, right toward the mounted camera that had been the subject of heated discussion all morning. The $500,000 custom lens, specifically modified for Morrison's signature low-light sequences, took the full impact of the caffeinated projectile. The set fell silent. Even the walkie-talkies seemed to hold their breath. Morrison, who had been intensely reviewing footage on a nearby monitor, turned slowly, his steel-gray eyes, famous for both their photogenic quality and their ability to reduce Oscar-winning actors to tears, fixed on Sarah. At 35, he was younger than most directors of his caliber and far more handsome, a fact that both entertainment magazines and his string of actress ex-wives never failed to mention. That, he said quietly, was a custom-calibrated piece of equipment. Sarah's mind raced. 3 years of film school, 2 years of technical production courses, and countless hours studying Morrison's techniques all crystallized into a single desperate idea. The diffusion, she blurted out. The coffee, it's actually created a natural diffusion pattern on the lens. If you angle it under your signature low lighting, it'll create an organic gradient that could enhance the dreamlike quality you were trying to achieve in scene 43. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, the most expression anyone had seen from him since Tuesday's catering crisis. Roll camera, he commanded, turning back to the monitor. Let's see what our innovative new lens filter can do. The next 15 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. She watched as Morrison reviewed the test footage, his expression unreadable, Around her, crew members alternated between shooting her sympathetic glances and updating their resumes, anticipating the imminent job opening. Finally, Morrison straightened up. "The coffee lens stays," he announced. "Someone get Ms. Chen some dry clothes. And a new coffee order." He paused, then added with the ghost of a smile, "Hold the aerial acrobatics this time." Relief flooded through Sarah, followed quickly by disbelief. She'd not only kept her job, but had accidentally created something that impressed James Morrison, a man who once made an actor repeat the same head tilt 147 times. It wasn't until 3 a.m., while helping to clean up the day's chaos, that Sarah found it, a leather-bound notebook that had fallen behind Morrison's director's chair. Inside, his distinctive handwriting filled the margins with notes about the film, revealing doubts and fears she'd never expected from someone of his reputation. The last page contained a single line that made her breath catch. "How do you make something real when you've forgotten what truth feels like?" Sarah stared at the words, then at the coffee-stained camera still mounted nearby. As she carefully returned the notebook to Morrison's chair, she didn't realize she'd just stumbled upon both the beginning and the end of her own Hollywood story, one that would force her to answer that very question for herself. The test screening room crackled with tension as Midnight Echoes reached its climactic scene. Sarah, stationed at the back with her laptop to record audience reactions, watched the real drama unfold in the faces of the viewers. Frowns deepened. Phones emerged from pockets. 2 people actually walked out. Morrison sat stone still in the center of the room, his shoulder blades tight enough to snap. Beside him, studio executive Victoria Lang's expression grew stonier with each negative reaction card she reviewed. The film's leading lady, and Morrison's current girlfriend, Melissa Hart, gripped his arm with manicured fingers that seemed more restraining than supportive. "Well," Victoria said after the last viewer filed out, her voice arctic, "that was a $60 million disaster." The room erupted into careful chaos, the kind where everyone tries to shift blame while appearing constructive. The marketing team suggested new trailer cuts. The editors proposed reshuffling scenes. Melissa launched into an impassioned defense of her performance that nobody had actually criticized. Sarah stared at her laptop screen, where she'd been compiling audience feedback. Among the expected complaints about pacing and confusion, a pattern emerged. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the problem, the same issue she'd noticed during late-night footage reviews, the one she'd carefully documented but never dared mention. "The ending betrays the theme," she said quietly, then louder as heads turned her way. "The protagonist's choice in the final scene contradicts everything we've learned about trauma and healing in the first 2 acts." Silence fell like a guillotine. Morrison's eyes locked onto her with laser intensity. "You're suggesting I don't understand my own film's theme?" Sarah's mouth went dry, but she thought of his notebook, of that vulnerable question about truth. She pulled up her analysis. The audience believes in Anna's journey for 2 hours. They invest in her struggle to trust again after betrayal. But in the end, we force a reconciliation that feels imposed. Hollywood, not human. "Because audiences want hope," Melissa interjected, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "That's why they come to movies." "They want truth," Sarah countered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Even in their escapism. The numbers show it. Every negative response mentions the ending feels fake. If Anna chooses to forgive herself instead of her abuser, if she finds strength in walking away rather than in a forced reunion." She stopped, realizing she'd just effectively suggested scrapping and reshooting the entire 3rd act of a film already over budget. "Get out." Morrison's voice was quiet, deadly quiet. Sarah gathered her laptop with trembling fingers and headed for the door, mentally calculating how long it would take to pack up her desk. Behind her, the debate resumed, voices rising and falling like waves against a cliff. At 11:47 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "My office. Now." She found Morrison alone in his darkened office, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, looking more like a grad student than Hollywood's wonderkind. Empty coffee cups surrounded his desk, all perfectly temperatured, no doubt. "Show me," he said without preamble. For the next 5 hours, they dissected every scene, every line, every emotional beat. Sarah watched in amazement as Morrison dismantled his own work with surgical precision, ego set aside in service of story. Dawn was breaking when they finally had a new ending, one that felt true. "We start reshoots tomorrow," he announced, rubbing his eyes. "Don't tell anyone what we discussed here. As far as they're concerned, I had a midnight epiphany." Sarah nodded, gathering her notes. At the door, she paused. "Why did you listen to me?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Because you saw what I was afraid to admit." He picked up his phone, presumably to begin damage control with Melissa and the studio. "Go home, Ms. Chen. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting." Walking to her car, Sarah realized her hands were shaking again, not from fear this time, but from something far more dangerous: possibility. The morning Sarah's promotion hit the industry trades, her phone exploded with congratulatory messages and warnings disguised as compliments. "Associate producer at 28? Watch your back, sweetie. Moving up fast in Morrison's world. Hope you know what you're doing." But it was the text from Melissa Hart that made her pause longest. "Congrats on the promotion. Funny how it came right after James announced our breakup, isn't it?" Sarah deleted them all and focused on the task at hand, salvaging a crucial dialogue scene that felt flat despite 14 takes. She watched Morrison pace behind the monitors, his frustration evident in the tight set of his shoulders. The crew moved with exaggerated care, knowing that take 15 could either break the tension or their careers. "It's still not working," Morrison muttered, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. The studio executives hovering nearby exchanged glances. They were 3 days behind schedule, and whispers about Morrison losing his touch had begun circulating. Sarah studied the playback, then scribbled something in her ever-present notebook, the twin to Morrison's leather one. Though she'd never told him about finding it that first night, she slid the note onto his desk. "The blocking traps them. Let them move like their emotions." He read it, frowned, then called for the actors to reset. "We're throwing out the blocking. Follow your instincts." The resulting take brought tears to the crew's eyes. Later, accepting praise from the studio heads, Morrison smoothly took credit for the insight. Sarah didn't mind. It was their unspoken arrangement. In public, she was simply the efficient associate producer who kept his productions running. In private, during their midnight story sessions, she was his creative equal, challenging his ideas and shaping the film's soul. The gossip reached fever pitch when paparazzi caught them leaving the studio at 3 a.m. Sarah, shivering in the unexpected rain, had Morrison's jacket draped over her shoulders. The photos hit TMZ by sunrise. Morrison's new muse. From PA to producer to. Her mother called, concerned. "I saw the photos, sweetheart. You remember what happened to his last 3 girlfriends?" "It's not like that," Sarah insisted, though something twisted in her stomach as she said it. "We're just working." But just working became increasingly complicated. Morrison began seeking her input on everything, from casting decisions to marketing strategies. They developed a strange intimacy, not physical, but something almost more dangerous. He shared his deepest creative fears with her, and she found herself opening up about her own directorial dreams. During a particularly late editing session, he asked to read her screenplay. "It's not ready," she hedged, thinking of the password-protected file on her laptop, a story that drew too heavily from her observations of power dynamics in Hollywood. "I could help you develop it," he offered, his voice carrying that rare warmth he seemed to reserve for their private conversations. "You have a unique voice, Sarah. It should be heard." The moment hung between them, heavy with possibility. Then his phone buzzed. His new leading lady, Amber Sullivan, needed to discuss her character choices over dinner. "Gold," Sarah said, managing a smile. "I'll finish the editing notes." After he left, she opened her screenplay file. The protagonist, once a thinly veiled criticism of Morrison-like directors, had evolved into someone more complex. Someone who, like the real Morrison, lived in the space between genius and manipulation, between genuine connection and calculated moves. She was adding a new scene when the cleaning crew arrived. Rosa, who'd been tidying Morrison's sets for a decade, paused by her desk. "Be careful, Mijita," she said softly. "I've seen this movie before. The ending never changes." Sarah saved her screenplay and gathered her things, pretending not to notice how Morrison's jacket still hung on her chair, or how natural it felt there, like a second skin she hadn't meant to grow.